in terms of animal welfare decision making, some of the new technologies coming out about euthanasia are important for a couple of reasons. Whenever we talk about euthanasia, it's a really hot topic with the public. One of the sort of the gold standard document that's used for policy is the American Vet Med Association's panel on euthanasia, and I just want to highlight that they are doing their current review right now. So they review it every couple of years, and they're about to launch the next version of it. Most of the swine sections are still intact the way they have been, but there's been a couple of tweaks, so it'll be interesting to see what that new version comes out like. They've had it out for public comment. Some of you may have seen that. But whenever you make standards, what AVMA relies on is peer-reviewed, published scientific research that's in an English journal, English language journal, and that has empirical data or numbers beside it. And when we get into swine euthanasia, there's been pretty thin on the ground experimental work, especially when we talk about, in this case, mechanical methods as an example. A lot of the standards we've developed have really just been from very small numbers and small number of papers. So, for example, if we look down to, you might notice that there actually isn't a single paper up there for captive bolt, and that is correct. There actually is not a single paper right now for swine captive bolt euthanasia, and that's one of the projects that I'm going to talk about. But even if we look at the gunshot method, that is all based on an experiment with one pig, and it was a 240 kilogram sow, and that's the basis of where we're having the trajectories for our gunshots. So Pork Board has recognized this. The National Pork Board has done a super job of soliciting research and providing funds for increasing the number of papers that we're seeing. So a couple of projects that we are just in the process of getting out into the literature and we have completed. This is some work that my master's student Jennifer Woods did together with Jeff Hill, Kent Schwartz, Ray Brooks, Roger Main, and Temple Grandin. And this was looking at a new captive bolt technology called the Cash Special. You probably are familiar with the sort of regular Cash Special that we used for sows and finisher pigs, but the new version has been designed to be able to do all weight classes of pig with the same gun. And the way it works is it has 4 different heads. This one over on the far right is the non-penetrating head, which is meant for baby pigs as an alternative to blunt force trauma. So you'd use this in the suckler house and also in the early stages of the nursery. And then we have 3 different captive bolt penetrating heads with different bolt lengths. And each bolt length and head is associated with its own charge of cartridge. So the first thing that we did for this experiment was to make sure that it was actually going to kill the pigs as a single-step method. If you get into the literature, especially the international literature for the World Animal Health Organizations and others, they actually say captive bolt is only acceptable as a 2-step method. It's supposed to be followed with exsanguination, even though in practical cases we know that it usually kills pigs. So we wanted to gather data to show it actually will kill pigs, and we started this with anesthetized pigs. So these pigs, if the gun wasn't going to work correctly, we didn't need to worry about them suffering because they were unconscious, and we just waited to see how long it would take for the heart and the respiratory functions to cease. And then we dissected the heads, we fixed them in formalin, we dissected the heads, and we scored the traumatic brain injury and the level of bolt penetration on these cadavers. And what you're looking at here is a cut of a sow's head, and here is her face, the front of her face, and what this knife is showing is the trajectory of the long captive bolt into her head. And you can see this huge sinus here where the fingers are, and there's a little bit of bleeding back into the sinus area, and that's what makes it so difficult to euthanize pigs with captive bolt compared to cattle. So they have that big, massive skull, and then within the skull they have that big, massive sinus that we have to try to get through. This is kind of a grim topic, but it's actually really kind of interesting too when you get into the details of it. And one of the things is we always just assume, or you may assume, that when you're doing captive bolt, you really need the bolt to be causing the traumatic brain injury, but actually that's a very small part of it. So this is actually a sow that was euthanized correctly. She did die with that single shot, and that you can see the trajectory barely even touches her brain matter at all. But what is going to cause, so that will be one level of brain trauma that's caused there, but the other things that are going to happen is the shearing force of the concussion of the head. So you have the punch, and the brain is going to be moving, and the nerve cells are going to rip and turn because of the way that the brain is moving. So that's going to cause axonal damage. And then you also see some bleeding down here, especially down here in the brainstem. And this is a really important area for us because that bleeding also is evidence that there is trauma down there and seems to be quite critical. The brainstem down here is the most important part for causing the cessation of heart and respiratory functions. So based on the cadaver research and the anesthetized pigs, it looked like we were going to be able to be in good shape to move forward to live trials, but we did make a couple of suggestions for refinements on the device before we went out with the live trials. So first was we did need to do a secondary SEP for 4 of the pigs. So again, they were unconscious, but we had a ceiling of 10 minutes, and if their heart was still going at 10 minutes, then we bled them out. And so they went back and made the bolt a little longer, and they made the charge more powerful. And then with the little baby pigs, it was very effective, but it was too powerful. It was causing too much damage, and actually the eyeballs sometimes were protruding, and you can imagine that was aesthetically displeasing. So they cut back on the charge at the small end of the pig. So we went out and kindly, one of our commercial producers, Murphy Brown, donated pigs and let us come out to Missouri to one of their farms. And we had 30 pigs in each of 7 weight classes of pigs. So the little suckler pigs, and we went to the weaners, which were just right at the age of going into the nursery. We had the older nursery pigs, growers, market weight, breeding animals, so the mature animals, but then we also asked for the biggest bruisers that they had on the sow and boar line, knowing that those are the ones that are often problematic. As I said, we used a non-penetrating head for the sucklers and the weaners, and then we used 3 bolt lengths for the different weight classes of pig. 10 pigs were euthanized by each stock person. So we had 3 people for each weight class of pigs, and half of the pigs were female, half were male, for a total of 210 pigs. As far as success, the first thing is that all of the pigs were rendered insensible. So I really want, out of all the take-home messages right now, the one when you're talking about euthanasia with people not familiar with pigs, and even when you're doing it yourself, the most urgent thing to do is check that the pigs are insensible. And you can check that immediately with a mechanical method like this by touching the eyeball, and they should close if they close their eyelid, then they're sensible. That means that the shot was not effective, even if they're not moving. You need to go in and do a second shot. So the very first thing you do is check the pupil. If you can get in, touch the eye, just look for that corneal response. So all our pigs were insensible, but we did have 8 pigs that required a second shot for the heart to cease. Of those, 5 of the 10 were mature boars up in the highest weight categories, and 4 of those 5 were actually euthanized by the same stock person who was experienced with euthanasia, but he didn't do it regularly. And we started with the boars, and we just told the stock people, you're familiar with the method, here's the gun, use it the way you normally use it on farm. So we didn't give them a lot of specifics, other than making sure that they knew where their landmarks were, which they did. And these guys, 2 of the 3 guys did not snare their pigs. We had them coming down, and the pigs were restrained in what was essentially like a gestation stall type area outside the building. So they were physically restrained, but they didn't restrain the head. The last person that did it was the person that usually euthanized their boars, and he snared everything, even though the animal was restrained and couldn't move around in this tiny space. He still wanted to restrain everything, and he actually held the snare and shot at the same time was his method, and he was extremely effective. And so for both public safety and because we had this high level of unsuccess that we were concerned about, we snared everything after that. 2 of the sows, even though they were snared, were not successfully euthanized without a second shot. And in both cases, it appeared to be there was it was poor placement. They had the landmarks right, but they weren't holding the gun flush to the head, and that's really critical for captive bolt. And then we had 1 suckler pig, but it appeared to be a faulty cartridge because it made a really funny sound. Immediately, the animal's going to go into clonic movements or involuntary movements, but if it's unconscious, that's really just a case of aesthetics because the pig can't feel anything. And that's you can see the variation here, but it generally will go on for about 2 minutes, but was much longer with the breeding animals and tended to fade in and out. So in terms of safety, it's good to be aware that even though they've been thrashing around and they've gone still, they're likely to go in and do another round of thrashing around. The other thing to keep in mind is even though they've stopped thrashing around within 2 minutes, their heart actually doesn't stop for another 2 minutes. So I generally say that, by the time they stop thrashing around, you should assume it's going to be another, like twice as long as whatever that was before the animal's heart stops. And you should go back and double check before you put it on the dead pile that it is indeed dead. So check for that heart rate before you put it on the dead pile. Because the worst thing that could happen is if they return to consciousness. And if it's a poor shot, that could happen. So the take-home message, our research indicates captive bolt was effective as a single-step method of euthanasia for 5 of the weight classes of pig, but when we get up to the mature sows and boars, that's where we need to be really careful and be prepared to always have a second shot ready in your pocket so you can immediately come in and fix it. And key things to keep in mind would be placement and angle, making sure it's flush against the head, and snaring seem to be associated with greater success. Quickly, there's also a non-penetrating captive bolt that's a pneumatic device for baby pigs. It's not commercially available yet, called the Zephyr, developed at the University of Guelph. And we field tested it out here in Iowa at Elite Pork Products. And the nice thing about this is you can do shots in rapid succession, and it's really lightweight, and it doesn't feel like a gun. So for somebody like me that's not used to handling guns and finds the big penetrating cartridge-powered ones to be quite heavy and difficult, this one was really simple. It's just a modified nail gun. So Teresa Casey came out and tested it on 100 piglets. We had 10 piglets per stock person. And again, what you'll see is in dark is the leg movements. So again, this is in seconds, so 200 seconds before the limbs stop and about twice that long before the heart ceases. But very effective. All piglets were immediately insensible with this method. We also, with this one, asked a quick questionnaire to see, did the producers actually like this device, or is this a total waste of time? So we asked them just to rate it 1 to 10, with 10, can I have it right now, and 1 being, get it off my farm, I wouldn't touch it. And it, on average, rated 8.7, so very, very high. They really, really liked it. The person that rated it lowest was the person that had the least experience, and the person that rated it highest is the person that did their regular, was their nursery, or their farrowing house fellow who did a lot of the euthanasias. Not everybody likes mechanical methods, partly because of the aesthetics and partly because of the costs and so on. One of the other methods that we're seeing a lot for baby pigs is the gas method. The nice thing is you can put the animal into the container and walk away. It's a hands-off method. So once you're doing the hands-on method, if you've never done it, a lot of people find that quite disturbing. So for many stock people, they actually prefer the gas. And this is a project that we did with Value Added Science and Technology, and Corky is here, and they are marketing that. Corky, can you put your hand up? Are you still here? There you are. And they are marketing that project. We were looking at the gas flow rates and the gas mixtures to see what is going to be ideal, looking at CO2, which is the standard, and then looking if we put in argon gas, which is a noble gas, and that on the poultry side looks like it might have some benefits. We wanted to see if that was a better solution. Ideally, we would just like the pigs to not be disturbed and go to sleep. The problem with CO2 is it causes some acidity because they become what's called hypercapnic. They get too much carbon dioxide in their system, and then they become hypoxic as well. So when we use argon, they're only becoming hypoxic in that they only have no oxygen. But what we see here is in general where we put in 50% argon, it's a much slower process than if we just use straight CO2. And as you might imagine, with a slow flow rate, it is taking longer. And this is, we can't measure insensibility. This is just the time for loss of posture. So we were feeling that at these really slow rates, and this is about 25 chamber volumes per minute, it was taking, even at the CO2 100%, it's taking more than 3 minutes for those pigs to lose posture. So we're assuming that they are conscious when they're up on their feet. Okay, and losing posture means that they fell down. And so they probably have a period of still being conscious when they are down that's after this. So we felt that was too long, and we were suggesting that it's probably better to go with the pre-fill or the fast I want to point out that our pre-fill, we still keep the gas flowing. So it's pre-charged, but the gas continues to flow. And if you look at the recommendations from National Pork Board and American Association of Swine Veterinarians, their pre-fill is you have to keep the gas flowing. I understand that some producers have been making systems that they pre-fill and they don't keep the gas flowing, and that is a real problem because you can have pigs that you're just not maintaining the gas concentration. A lot of people ask whether the baby pigs take a lot longer. In actual fact, we found that the really small pigs, the neonates, were faster responding to gas euthanasia than the weaned pigs. But we are going to follow up with some experiments looking at respiratory disease, pigs that may actually take longer to die, because some of the news from the field is people will say, well, sometimes I euthanize a group of pigs and the box is set to turn off after 5 minutes because normally that's when all the pigs would die, but every once in a while we get pigs that linger and they actually can go through the process 1 or even 2 more times. So what is it about those pigs that are different? We got some funding from USDA to look at that. So take-home messages. In terms of what we know right now, adding 50% argon, not recommended. It just slows down the process, and based on other behavior data I'm not showing here, it doesn't seem to decrease the distress. So it didn't do what we were hoping. We are doing some follow-ups with other gases and 100% argon to see if it's better. Right now we're suggesting if you're using CO2 that you use a fast flow rate just to try to induce that quick loss of consciousness. Future directions for euthanasia research. On the mechanical side, it seems like the key thing that people want to see is restraint for the suckling pigs, just because of the human safety dangers of being in close when you're trying to restrain them. And then, as I said, the gas methods, we're trying to look at why some piglets appear to be resistant and whether we can find better gas mixtures. And lastly, we actually got some funding to also do a survey of caretakers and also of the public to see what euthanasia technologies do they find acceptable. Many of the critics of animal agriculture appear to favor gas methods, and if that's true, and that's true of our general public, then that's one we want to consider continuing to follow up with. But there might be some other methods like electrocution that are equally acceptable and maybe worth pursuing.